Hello Internet, Zach here, and welcome back to Collecting the Elements. In this episode, I'm going to be electrorefining copper. Now, copper's kind of special. It's one of the few metals that isn't silver colored. The others being gold, cesium, and that's really it. Other than that, all the metals are pretty much silver colored. Anyway, copper is the second best electrical conductor on the periodic table, second only to silver, and one of the best conductors of heat. It melts at approximately 1084 degrees Celsius, which is 1984 degrees Fahrenheit. But the real focus of this episode is on electrorefining copper, which doesn't involve any melting. So, what I do is I start by making copper sulfate. Yes, you can buy copper sulfate at the right hardware store if you look for root killer. But I'm doing this on a budget, and $1 worth of epsom salt is a heck of a lot cheaper. So, I'll show you how to make copper sulfate out of epsom salt. And then I'll show you how to use that copper sulfate to electrorefine copper into at least 99.9% purity. That's the absolute minimum purity that comes out of this process. Given that I'm starting with copper that's probably already 99.9% pure, I wish I had a way to test the purity of the copper I ended up with, because it's probably pretty ridiculous. So, without any further ado, let's show you how I did this. In order to electrorefine copper, it helps to have copper sulfate. Now, this is a low-budget channel, so I'm not actually going to go to the hardware store and get copper sulfate. I'm just going to take this $1 glass vessel from Dollar Tree, filled full of tap water, $1 epsom salts, and some copper wire that I pulled out of a dumpster and made into a big coiled up mess. Actually, I'll put that in after I mix in the epsom salts. Now, epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, and the point of what I'm doing here is displacing the magnesium ions and replacing them with copper ions. Get a spare piece of wire here to stir with. First thing is to stir as much epsom salt into this as I can. Make up a saturated solution. Should be about enough. That wasn't even the whole bag. Alright. Add the electrode. Okay, new setup. Using an iced tea bottle, but collecting the hydrogen is kind of a fail. We do have some dark blue copper sulfate forming down here at the bottom, which is a good thing. The rest of this is just kind of So, if the check valves and the squeeze bulb to try to collect the hydrogen in a balloon, the trouble is, you can probably hear the hissing sound as air is being pulled in. So, that's going to contaminate the hydrogen with air, which makes it not nearly as useful. So, I'm just going to rip the top off of this, go for maximum surface area, and just try to convert the magnesium sulfate to copper sulfate as quickly as I can. Fold that around. Fold it around there too. Give it a little more strength. Immerse it in the solution. And turn the power back on. Hopefully that'll work better. So I've taken out the original copper electrode. I'm going to use this when I actually electrorefine the copper when I have copper sulfate available, which is the purpose of this. One of the other problems, some of the solution I have left is still filtering, that's copper hydroxide. Copper's not supposed to be falling out of solution so early. So that was another problem I was running into. So hopefully this geometry will work better. I've put the copper electrodes way up here. So hopefully the copper won't be getting into the cathode chamber quite so quickly. But as you can see, it still kind of has that copper hydroxide color. Well, we'll see. Okay, it's been about 12 hours since I started this. As you can see, the solution is starting to turn the deep blue of copper sulfate. We're getting there. Alright, electrolysis has been running now for about 17 hours. And I'm going to degunk the electrodes a bit again. I did a little research. I found out that copper wire used in electrical wiring is very pure, actually. The major impurity in it being oxygen. So the gunk falling off isn't really made of impurities per se, it's made of copper oxides, which are, from what I was reading, are in the wire intentionally because the oxygen helps reduce the quantity of other impurities during processing. Yeah, the electrodes are wearing pretty unevenly. In fact, they're pretty close to breaking at the bottom. And there's the copper oxide accumulating at the bottom. And the deep blue color of copper sulfate here. Alright, 22 hours in. And the electrodes have largely fallen apart. But time to disconnect this, take the electrodes out. and filter off my copper sulfate. Just put that in that jar for now. That's my dark blue copper sulfate. Odd. So I thought that was all copper oxide. Some of it kind of looks more like finely divided copper powder. Alright, after messing around and experimenting with a couple of different methods, I finally found something that works for purifying the copper quite nicely. So, in series with the battery, I have this little silicon diode here that drops about 0.6 volts, reducing the 1.5 volts from the battery down to about 0.9. The result of this has actually been this very, get in the frame, very sparkly, crystalline copper glitter. Given that the purity of this sample at this point is probably well over 99%, I'm just going to start bottling this up in my test tube, and I'm going to see how long it takes to make a large enough sample of this crystalline copper glitter. Alright, I just pulled this out of the solution. It's been electrolyzing and growing crystals for about 4 hours, I think. So, time to scrape the crystals off, rinse them, and let them dry. And I'll put this back in the solution so it can grow more crystals. That's to rinse off the copper sulfate so that it doesn't mess the copper crystals up. So just let that filter through, let it dry, and then put those in the test tube. Alright, this is about 9 hours of growth. Look at all those big sparkly crystals. If I can very carefully pick them up. And lose a bunch of them, of course. Get them in the frame. Focus. There we go. And put the electrode back in, see if I can grow some more of these before the sun comes up. Alright, here's some copper speaker wire. And here's a heat source. And there is a nice shiny bead of copper. Okay, melting the first piece of copper was fun. Let's do that again. But let's get these three out of here. And the one from earlier. Not bad, actually. The last of the fine copper powder from the electrolysis. Let's get in the shot here. Focus. Focus. There we go. and the 4 little copper beads. You all know what comes next, right? And there it is, an ampoule of copper. And there you go. There's copper. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you did, hit the thumbs up button. If you have a friend who might enjoy it, hit share. And if you want to see more, hit subscribe. See you next time.